Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Morning Cafe. Now let's shift gears to matters law, turn to the corridors of justice. And with us, we have Wakili Minor Patrick Njama, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And this morning, we want to talk about father's right on the birth certificate. You know, what are your rights once your name is there, and what are the consequences of your name appearing in the birth certificate of a child? We'll be talking about so many issues, including that, and we are inviting you, of course, to be part of this conversation. Wakili is here to help you understand your rights as a father, and in regards to also paternity issues, DNA, in case you need to take DNA to just prove to the court that the child is yours, in case you need to have your name in the birth certificate of a child. We have a number on your screen. Be sure to call in, interact with us on our social media platforms as well, TV47 Kenya on Facebook and YouTube, and on X at TV47 News KE. My handle is at @Ann_Didi, and I'll be sure to read your comments here in studio. Karibu sana, Wakili.
Asante sana.
All right, let's begin with the basics. You know, we've already talked about matters paternity, DNA, but even before we get deep into it,
Yes.
what does the law says about, you know, a father's right, you know, once his name is in the birth certificate?
Okay, to respond to that question, we have to go back to the constitution of our country. When we were promulgating a new constitution, they saw it fit to include an article specific on children in the constitution. That's Article 53. So if we want to look at the rights, duties, and responsibilities of a father, we'd look at Article 53(1)(a) and E. Specifically, E talks about parental care and protection, which includes equal responsibility of both the mother and father to provide for the child, whether they are married or not. So initially, our law, nowadays the issue of the legitimacy of a child does not arise, because previously you had to be married for your child to be considered legitimate.
Yeah.
But now when we got this new constitution, doesn't matter whether the parents are married or not. They have equal rights, duties, and responsibilities under the law. Yes.
So I understand you say that whether you're married or not, you still have equal responsibilities to take care of the child.
Yes.
But I also understand that a mother has to give consent for your name as a father to appear in the birth certificate of a child, especially if not married. So what happens when this mother has not, you know, given consent for your name as maybe a father? You're not married, but as a father, what happens in that situation where I have not given consent for your name to be in the birth certificate of my child?
That happens in situations where maybe the birth mother took out a birth certificate and excluded the name of the father. If the father wants to be brought on board and have his name added to the birth certificate, there are two ways of having it done. If the mother consents, they apply to the registrar of births and the name is added. The mother will have to do an affidavit of consent and say that indeed this is the biological father. If the mother does not consent and refuses to acknowledge the father, then the man has a recourse in court. He can file a suit for recognition of his parental rights, duties, and responsibilities, and an order then would be given for his name to be added to the birth certificate. But in such cases, he has to be ready also to have a DNA test conducted so that the court can be satisfied that indeed he's the biological father to that child. Yes.
So in case where the mother has not given consent, you know, is the father completely locked out of recognition before, of course, the courts are brought into book?
The court is always the option of the last resort. If they have been unable to agree totally, then the man will have no other recourse than to have the court enforced. Because, okay, courts of law are good places for declarations of rights, duties, and responsibilities, but they don't repair broken relationships. By the time a father gets to enforce their rights and duties in court, it means they are not able to agree on most of these issues, and probably he's even locked out of access to the child. So in such a case, you'd have no other option rather than go to court so that he can have a declaration of his rights, duties, and responsibilities. Yes.
You mentioned about Article 53 of the Kenyan Constitution.
Yes.
And my worry is, it speaks about a child's right to parental care and protection, of course.
Yes.
But does that law implicitly, include the right to have both parents recognized by default, in the birth certificate?
Well, to address that, we would have to go now down to the Children's Act of the Republic of Kenya. I think under Section 7, that's where it addresses the issue of a child having a birth certificate. You see, the Constitution provides the broad outline of what the duties, rights are supposed to be. Then the Children Act now goes to the issue of a specific section, Section 7, addresses the issue of name and nationality. Those two tenets go to the heart of the identity of a child, whereby a child has a right to a name and a nationality. Now, when it comes to the name, that's where the issue of having both parents recognized, because it's at the heart of the identity. Where did I come from as a child if I can't trace my roots? So for children now, that's where the issue of they have to be issued with a birth certificate. And as far as it's legally possible to have the names of both of their parents captured on the birth certificate. Even kids who are found in the streets and have no known roots in this country, the law has provided that they should be issued with a birth certificate. Sometimes we have abandoned children whose parents cannot be traced. But that right to a name and identity, that obligation is placed on the government to ensure, one, they have a birth certificate. So if later a child is abandoned and a father comes up and says that this is my child, but they were already issued with a birth certificate, that father still has a right to now claim his parental duties and responsibilities and rights, but he still have to go through the same process of going to court and proving, one, he's the father, and secondly, how comes that this child was abandoned and you had not taken charge of the welfare of the child at that point. Yes.
Do you have these cases, coming up when maybe say the child is above 18 years or say 15, 16, when they're, sound mind to make decisions for themselves? Yes. Do we have, cases coming up in court when children are now of age to think for themselves?
Yes, we have cases where children are the ones who sue their parents, especially on matters to do with extension of parental responsibility. Because once a child turns 18 legally, a person is not, the parent is not obligated to take care of the child anymore. But if that child is in school and the parent, let's say the father, refuses to continue providing for them, that child can take the dad to school and have the father get compelled by court to keep paying school fees and maintaining them until they are done with their schooling. Yes.
When we talk about child custody laws, usually they say it's for the best interest of the child.
Yes.
And now that brings me to the question of also what we were talking about this morning, the father's right on the birth certificate.
Yes.
Do we also look at it from it being on the best interest of the child? Say, ata mtoto hataki jina. So do you look at it from that angle? Or in this case, the child has no say?
The best interest of the child have to be evaluated according to the circumstances. And unless a parent is abusive, this cuts both ways. It's always in the best interest of that child to have experience paternal love and maternal love. So unless there are compelling reasons why the father should not be included, the courts will always go towards including that father in the life of their child, whether it's in the birth certificate, access to the child, because once again, every right comes with duties and obligations. You can't, the law is a sword that cuts both ways. You can't go claiming the right as a parent that I want to be in my son or daughter's birth certificate, but you want to evade the responsibility of provision. So it goes both ways. Once you claim that the right, you have to be ready to perform your duties and responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Every right comes with duties and obligations, just like you said, and that brings me now to this question.
Yes.
What does it legally mean for a father to have his name on a child's birth certificate? What rights does it automatically confer, whether biological or not biological?
One, it's the right to exercise care, protection, and provision over the child. Because once a child is born, the only document of identity they have until they turn 18 is one, the birth certificate, which can also be, is a key document in acquisition of, for example, a passport. You see, for an ID, you have to be of the age of majority for the state to give you a national ID.
Yeah.
But passports can be granted even to a child who is months old. So for you to get to that point of acquisition of a passport, you have to have a birth certificate.
Yes.
Secondly, once you have, whether you have the father's name or not, if you want to travel outside the country with your child, the other parent has to grant consent, or you have to bring an order of court giving you sole legal custody over the child. So it's easier when the name of the father is on the birth certificate, because they just need to say an affidavit that they have consented the child traveling. Same thing for the mother. Sometimes it's the father who wants to travel with the child and the mother will consent. So it's always easier when both parents are included in the birth certificate. Yes.
So does this mean equal parenting authority with the mother, you know, or are there still any legal limitations? And I'm asking this question from the point of, you know, you have acquired now, you want to take responsibility of that child.
Yes.
You did not, you know, you're not the biological father. So does it mean that you still have the same, you know, authority as a father, the same way as the mother?
Now, when you come to acquired parental responsibility, where a man is not the biological father to a child, but he has one accepted and wants to be included now as the father of the child, for example, in a birth certificate, you acquire the same, all the rights that a father has over that child. You also acquire all the duties and responsibilities. And unfortunately, if a few years down the line, you and the mother fall out and you had acquired those parental duties and responsibilities, they can still be enforced against you because you voluntarily took up the issue of being the father to this child, and that includes having the right to exercise control over their life, provide over them. So you get the whole bag. You don't get to choose what to take and what to leave. Yes.
In that case, what happens when now the biological father of the child is now facing off with, you know, the parent who acquired now the responsibilities of taking care of this child? Amekuja amesema the child is mine, but in this case where now they have separated, does it mean that this stepfather still has to pay child support, school fees and whatnot?
No, that would be a unique case unless the mother has separated from both, because if she separated from the biological father and is now living with the stepfather, and the biological father comes, he'll be given access to the child. Secondly, he'll have to exercise responsibility, that is provide for the child. But it won't take away the role that the stepfather is playing, because basically the stepfather will be the one who is living with the child on a day-to-day basis, and the father will have access maybe on weekends and holidays. So at the end of the day, such a child will have to get the experience of having two fathers, basically. Yes.
Interesting. This is quite an interesting topic this morning, and I just want to invite our viewers to be part of it. There is a number on your screen. We'll be happy to hear from you. Of course, if you have questions for Wakili Minor Patrick Njama, he's here just for you this morning, and on our socials as well, TV47 Kenya on Facebook and YouTube. Wakili, now what about financial obligations? You know, once a father is named, is now on the birth certificate, is he now legally obligated to provide maintenance, give child support, and everything that pertains to the benefit of the child?
Actually, there's a misconception that parental rights and duties are acquired. The moment you make a baby with someone and that baby is born, your duties and obligations begin there. It does not matter whether you are included in the birth certificate or not. Under the law, you're supposed to be responsible and provide for that child. Financially, in terms, take care of their education, take care of their food, shelter, clothing, the normal duties parents perform. Parental duties and responsibilities don't have to be acquired through the law. It's an operation of biology, unless it's a case where it's not a biological child. That one is a voluntary one. Yes.
When you're talking about the issue of consent, that a parent has to give consent for another parent for the child to relocate with them.
Yes.
But now in this case, for a stepfather, you know, most of the time we hear that stepfathers are not given, you know, that much responsibility by their wives. But now what happens? Does he have to give consent as well, despite this not being his child? Whatever he says, is it final, or it doesn't matter what he says?
Once a stepfather acquires parental responsibility and rights and duties of a child, then he has all the rights, duties, and responsibilities of a parent. If the mother needs to travel with that child, even if it's a stepfather, he'll still have to give his consent to the travel. Yes.
We have a caller. Peter is calling us from Eldred. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
Talk to us.
Nilikuwa naulizia
Okay.
hapa, nimeona hiyo mjadala ya right ya baba kwa katika nini ile certificate, mtoto hiyo birth certificate.
We can't hear you clearly, Peter.
Nilikuwa nauliza,
Yes.
kuna mjadala inaendelea ile ya right ya baba kwa kwenye certificate ya mtoto birth certificate. So nilikuwa nasikia daktari anasema hapo kuna vile yani anafuatilia ile right kwamba baba mwingine anaweza kuwa na uwezo wa kunini ya kuakwaya right ya kuwa mzazi wa huyo mtoto. Niulize sasa, vile huyo baba amekuwa ndani ya maisha ya mtoto, ameakwaya hiyo right na baba mwenyewe yupo pia, huwa ana provide, lakini sasa maybe walimficha ama unapata ile situation mama anasaidika lakini amemficha, na unapata kwamba anafuatilia upande zote. So situation kama hiyo unaweza fanya aje? Ndio wewe ni baba mzazi, una provide, lakini sasa ulinyimwa hiyo haki ya kupata hiyo kwa birth certificate, lakini sasa umejua kwamba I need to be there. Na pia kuna baba mwingine kanda na provide pia. So hapo hiyo situation ikitokea unaihandle aje, ama unafanya aje ndio at least mzazi mwenyewe ajulikane na asimamie hiyo majukumu ya mtoto wake, mtoto ajue kweli huyu ndio baba yangu na anasaidika hivi.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter, for that question. Wakili, what happens? Both parents are now contributing to the child's well-being.
Yes. One, if it's a matter that is already in court, they can do so on a pro rata basis where the court shares out the responsibilities. Secondly, they can always sit down and agree on what responsibilities each of them is going to take. The issue of, for example, unjust enrichment, where both are providing financially and the mother gets to retain the money, if that issue is raised in the court will judge the case according to circumstances. And sometimes we've had cases where even a man applies to have his name expunged from a birth certificate, where he was misled that he's the father, and then he realizes he's not the biological father to the child once the biological father comes to the picture. And he still has a right to that rectification. Another issue is sometimes we have mothers who apply to have the father added to the birth certificate, where the man refuses to acknowledge the child, but is the biological father, and the court will also order that the name be added. So it's, I think that the court will always look at what is in the best interest of the child. And that right to a name, identity, is always something that is very important. It will never be overlooked unless there are compelling reasons. Yes.
All right, asante sana Peter. Your Wakili has answered your question. If not, you are allowed to call in again and ask the question one more time. But you talk about there are parents who ask for their name to be expunged from the birth certificate.
Yes.
What happens when they were the ones, you know, giving child support, taking care of the child, paying school fees, child maintenance, and then it automatically stops because now they don't want their name anymore with reasons that they are not the biological parent to the child? Then what happens in that case?
they will have to apply to court to terminate their parental responsibility. And until that happens, before that order is given, they still have to continue providing. Yes.
Are there cases where maybe, the court has ruled in favor of the mother in that case, whether the mother or the child, both of them, in cases where, let's say, a court can rule that this father will not have to pay child maintenance anymore because he has found out that he's not the father of the child. So are there cases where, court has ruled in favor of the mother and the child?
It's only unless the man was misled into believing that he's the biological father, where the court would be willing to entertain a suit to extinguish the parental responsibility. Otherwise, if you knew the child was not yours and you voluntarily undertook to bring them up and assumed responsibility over their life, a child is not an asset that you can just carry along like chokesha unaweka kando. So once you assume responsibility, it's for life.
Okay.
Yes.
We have another call. Mwangi is calling from Zimmerman. Good morning. Maggie, good morning.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Talk to us. Okay.
Like now, niliolewa na mwanaume mwingine na nilikuwa na yule mwanaume wa kwanza, baba ya watoto. He doesn't take any responsibility. Then alafu stepdad and ana take all the responsibility. Kuna any time ama any chance atakuja kuuliza hao watoto na take any responsibility that first dad. Ndio nilikuwa nauliza kuna any chance atakuja kuulizia huyu mtoto na hakutake any responsibility yani.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for that question. Wakili.
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Even if you assume responsibility over children and bring them up, the biological parent will always have those rights and duties and responsibilities automatically under the law. So if they come up later and apply to be recognized as parents, the court will grant them that right because theirs is natural, it's not assumed. As long as it's a biological parent, theirs is natural under the law. So unless you bring compelling reasons why, and the only reason I think the courts can take is if that parent is abusive to kids, then in that case the court would be reluctant to allow them that much participation unless it's supervised. Yes.
Now, how can court prove in that case that this parent is abusive? Because if you're saying that for maybe 10 years, the father has not been in the child's life, and then he comes back later after 10 years or after 20 years and says he wants to be part of the child's life. Maybe he's abusive by nature, but no one knows because he has not been in the child's life. So how can court now prove that you're not suitable to be in this child's life?
Anytime there are questions regarding children, we have a children's department in Kenya, and anytime a matter is in court, one of the first things the court does is to ask for a social inquiry visit and a report from the children's officer attached to the court. So they'll do a thorough check around one, if a person is abusive and in their area of residence, those issues will come up one way or the other. So by the time that report is submitted to court, it's not, okay, it cannot be 100% thorough, but the court satisfies itself that this person is fit to exercise a level of control, responsibility and access to that child. Yes.
What happens when now, once the child is gone to be with the dad, or let's say new custody has been given to the father, if that can happen at all, but then he proves to be abusive or not capable of taking care of this child. Once amekuja akasema he wants to take responsibility of the child after many years of being away.
Yes.
Then what happens when he cannot fulfill his responsibilities?
One thing, it's really hard to take away a child from the parent who has been exercising actual custody and control unless there are very extreme circumstances, drug use and abuse of the child. So if a father comes in after years and wants to be involved in a child's life, one thing, probably they don't even have a relationship. So they will need time first to get to know each other and develop a bond. So what the court grants initially is access, visits where they get to interact. And then with time, maybe, if there are compelling reasons, they might be given actual custody. But what the court does most of the time is that the parent who has had actual custody, care, and control of the child continues having that. But legal custody now becomes joint and shared 50-50. That means decisions on where the child is going to go to school, decisions on medical procedures in case there's an illness, both parents will have to be involved. But on the issue of who lives with the child, it's very hard for you to come back after 10 years and start claiming a child and assume that utapatiwa tu. Yes.
That is not possible at all.
It's possible in situations where there are extreme circumstances, but it's very difficult. Extreme circumstances, as I've said, if let's say the mother is a drug abuser, or even in cases where the father has had a child, abuses drugs, and it's proven, it's documented. Secondly, it's abusive towards the child, because someone who abuses drugs will at times fail to perform their parental duties because they are inebriated. So the court will weigh the best interests of the child, and they might take away the child from that parent.
Okay.
Yes.
We have another caller. Okay, we have Wilberforce is on the line. Good morning, Wilberforce. How are you?
Good.
Yes, talk to us.
Yeah. Now, swali yangu ilikuwa ni hivi. For example, kama I'm the father of the children.
Okay.
Alafu sasa tumeseparate with the mother. Alafu birth certificate both za watoto wangu wote nimechukua yani nilichukua na majina yangu.
Okay.
Is there any possibility ya mama akienda na watoto apate na mwanamume mwingine waende kubadilisha hayo majina yangu itolewe ya father yepo ya another man? Yeah, maybe.
All right, thank you so much for that question, Wakili. Jina ziko ni zake.
Yes.
But now the wife goes to be with another man.
Yes.
Is there a possibility of the mother of the kids, now erasing his name and putting now the husband's name now, the new husband's name?
Yes. So now, one thing, as long as it's the biological father, you can't change those names legally unless there are compelling reasons. First, you would have to make an application to court that you want to change the names of the children. Ordinarily, if you want to do a name change, you can do a deed poll. But when it comes to the deed poll of a minor, both parents have to consent. So if the father is on the birth certificate, even if you change the name, you're not going to change the record that is on that birth certificate. Yes, you'll change the names, but the name of the father will still remain. So unless they went and applied to court, and I don't think the court would entertain a suit to strike out a father's name from the birth certificate for whatever reasons, because whatever differences the mother and father have, for this child to have to be properly rooted and have that sense of identity, they need to interact with both sides of the family, the side of the mother, the side of the father. So yes, the mother might have looked for a new husband, but it does not mean that they have ceased being the children of their biological father. Yes.
Wilberforce, usiwe na wasiwasi, watoto ni wako, according to Wakili here. But now, Wakili, let's go back to Maggie's question. Anasema another man has been taking care of the kids. The father has not been in the kid's life.
Yes.
But now, what's the worst that can happen? I understand that is the question that might be in her mind this morning.
Yes.
Now that the father wants to come back to the child's life,
yes.
How can she navigate that situation? What's the worst that can happen in that situation?
There's something that all parents need to understand. The participation of the other parent in your child's life is not a matter of choice for you. Unless there are compelling reasons why they shouldn't be allowed to participate, the court will always allow children to get to know their parents. So what happens is, if the man comes back, he will not be given custody of the kids, but he will be allowed access. And access means visitation, maybe on weekends, sometimes half of the school holiday. So they get to spend time with their father. But on the other hand, he'll also have to meet his obligations as a father, provide for the kids. Yes.
Peter is back, the first caller. Peter, good to have you again. Good morning once again.
Thank you. Nina swali hapa. Kuna tuseme sasa I had a wife.
Okay.
Tukapata watoto. Because of ABCD tukaachana. Akaangukia bwenyenye fulani.
Okay.
So mimi niko sina hiyo uwezo ya kusupport watoto. Yaani level yangu na huyo bwana ya bwana iko juu sana, huyo bwana mwingine. So ana support hao watoto fully. Na mimi sina hiyo uwezo ya kusupport, lakini nahitaji right ya kuaccess watoto wajue kwamba mimi ni baba yao.
Okay.
Na sina hiyo uwezo juu yeye ako na mali mengi, anapea watoto masomo ya hali ya juu. Lakini sasa ile hali ya kuaccess watoto nipate kwamba wajue kwamba I'm the legal father, kwamba hiyo ni damu yangu, wakikuwa wajue mimi ni baba yao. Sina hiyo uwezo. Kama sasa hapo nafanya aje ndio at least.
Okay.
Wakila naweza saidia hapo aje.
Sawa sawa. Thank you so much, Peter. We are happy to hear from you once again. Wakili.
Okay, what happens in such cases is this: one, he'll be granted access by the court. That is visitation. He'll access the children. On the part of responsibility, for example, if he can only, his level allows him to take them to public school, but now the stepfather is taking them to an international school, he'll be told to participate in paying bills at his level. So he'll contribute what he can afford. But you can't say that you want to force the kids to go to the school you can afford if there's a better option out there for them. But in terms of access, he'll have access to the kids. They'll be visiting. He'll be seeing them and interacting with them. But now in terms of responsibility, he'll be allowed to participate at the level he's comfortable with. Yes.
Maybe his worry is the mother doesn't give him a chance now to see the kids. How can he navigate that situation? From step by step, an approach courtage, yani, how does he start with that process? Because I understand maybe him asking this question is his worry that the mother is now in a better place and is looking down upon him.
First, the first option would be to report to the relevant children's office. And they would have a sit down with the children officer. If they can agree, they can do something called a parental responsibility agreement, where they basically agree on how to share responsibilities, duties, access to the child. Once this agreement is done, either parent can apply to court to have it registered and recognized as an order of the court by consent, because it's basically something you have agreed upon. Secondly, if they fail to agree or he feels that the agreement didn't reflect what he agreed to, he can approach now the children's court, where he files a suit seeking a declaration of rights, duties, and responsibilities, and seeking access and visitation on the children. And the court will consider the facts and circumstances of the matter, and he will be granted a court order allowing him access. In such a case, the mother has no choice but to comply. We always say as advocates and other courtesans that court orders are born mature. They don't have infancy. Once it's issued, it's supposed to be obeyed. So even if you disagree with it, as long as it's not been stayed or set aside, you first comply, then apply either to set it aside or appeal against it. Yes.
All right. We have Bundi from Nanyuki. Bundi, good morning. Bundi? Do you still have him on the line? Bundi? Bundi, morning. Ni kama ametutoroka. But now, you're talking about, back to Peter's call.
Yes.
Let's say in a situation where there is manipulation and the children have been manipulated, you know, to hate their father. Now they don't want to see him. In this case. Say the courts have already decided that Peter can now visit the kids, you know, pay whatever he can pay on his level. But now the children have been manipulated, you know, baba ni mbaya, baba na hii. Yeah, what happens in that case?
Before it gets to the man being allowed to see the children and accessing them, the court also does an examination that's called a voiredia, where the judicial officer will sit with the child privately and talk to them. So in case there has been an issue of trying to influence the child negatively towards the other parent, manipulate them into already having a negative perception of them, the court will explain to them, and if need be, it can even order counseling for the child, so that the child is able now to have a normal relationship with the father. At the end of the day, parents should learn not to involve the kids in their fights, because if you do, it's to the detriment of the child. Yes.
All right.
But it happens actually.
It does.
Yes.
We'll be coming back to that, but let's get this call from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to hear from you. Talk to us.
Yes, I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Because I'm a single mother of two, and the first child that the father rejected when I was 2 months pregnant, and I took birth certificate with my father's name. The surname is my father. So right now they are taking me to court to claim the child to be the child's right.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, why should they come now and they rejected the children when they were small, and I took the birth certificate with my father's name? Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that question. Wakili. Elizabeth's baba yake, jina baba yake ndiko kwa birth certificate ya mtoto.
Yes.
Now what happens?
Unfortunately for her, the biological father will always have a right to come and apply to be included, one, in the child's birth certificate, and secondly, to be included in and participate in the life of the child. She has a defense where she can say that there was abandonment and all that, but at the end of the day, the court will consider what is in the best interest of the children. And always, as I said, the child has a right to that sense of identity, and it's best when they have as long as it's possible, they have an interaction with both parents, get to know them, and also both sides of the family. Yes. But she's allowed now to bring her evidence of whatever has been going on. If she has tried to reach out previously and the man ignored, that will also be taken into consideration by the court before it makes a decision. Yes.
How does that evidence look like? Is it screenshots? Evidence itakaje, the one that she needs to present to court and say that I tried to bring him into the child's life, but to no avail?
It can be screenshots of conversations, intermediaries or witnesses who have been sent to talk to the other party, but they declined. Yes.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your question. You can always call again if you think you have more questions for Wakili in regards to that. But let's go back to the question of manipulation, because you said you see these cases so much in court.
Yes.
What happens now when you see court has realized that this mom manipulated the children into hating the father?
Yes.
Does that play into, you know, the benefit of the father or the mother or the child?
It doesn't play to the benefit of either. I've had a situation where we were in court and the child was handed over and she started screaming and crying. And the mother really tried to say it's not appropriate, they should be allowed to keep the child. They were told that's what children do, they cry. Because this child has not had a relationship with the father for a while, she'll take some time getting used to the dad. So the court still looks at what is in the best interests of the child. You cannot be allowed to manipulate the child and then benefit from the fruits of that. Yes.
Let's go back to the question of, you know, both fathers, the stepfather and the biological father, both contributing to the child's wellness and maintenance.
Yes.
So what is the legal standing in matters of inheritance? Who decides who gets what? You know, does the child get Malia, the biological father, or the stepfather?
Wow, now you have brought a very interesting question on matters of succession. The problem being succession happens after the parents are dead. So now when it comes to inheritance, children are heirs to their biological parents automatically. But now when it comes to the stepfather, and they were supporting this child and it's proven, then they have a right to inherit as dependents. They were depending on this person prior to their death. So in such circumstances, they can have it both ways. They can inherit from both the biological dad and the stepfather.
A win for the child.
Yes.
Now, what happens when, say, the mother unfortunately passes away, and in cases where they were not married? So does that mean that now that his name is on the birth certificate, he automatically assumes next of kin and the guardian title?
If the mother passes away,
yes,
and first, if the parental responsibility was acquired through a court process, then the man will be the one who will be left as the primary custodian.
In a case where, you know, the biological father is still alive, the stepfather is still alive, but now, say, the name that is on the birth certificate, maybe it could be the biological dad or the stepdad.
Yes.
Now, who assumes the guardian title?
The court will look at that according to the circumstances. There has been such a case where the stepfather was allowed to keep actual custody of the children. The biological father was allowed to keep visiting and actually be sending maintenance for taking care of his kids. Because if he was not allowed initially to take care of the kids, the death of the mother doesn't really change the circumstances that informed the court's decision in the first place. So unless there's, again, there are compelling reasons why the biological father is more suitable, the court won't upset that apple cart. It will let it continue.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's get this call from Peter. Peter is calling us from Siaya. Good morning, Peter.
Habari yako?
Nzuri sana. Talk to us.
Na tuko na swali hapa. Niko na issue na maybe mama, seme mama mtoto amekubali kukaa, lakini mama mkwe anataka nichukue mtoto wangu, msichana yake endelee na maisha yake, ni kama endelee na masomo. Hii itafaidika aje? Okay. Naweza chukua mtoto ama kuna shida mahali tena?
Okay, did you get that, Wakili?
Yes, I think I did.
Come again, Peter.
Okay, nasema hivi. Niko na issue na baby, si baby mama, niko na issue na mama mkwe wangu.
Okay.
Anataka nichukue msichana wake. But akitaka kuchukua msichana wake, nimezaa naye mtoto, anataka nichukue mtoto wangu yeye achukue msichana wake. Naweza chukua mtoto bila kusumbuliwa ama tasumbuliwa na serikali baadaye?
Okay. Yes. Now will the government come to, you know, kumsumbua if he takes responsibility of a child that is not his?
The child is not his biologically?
Yes.
Because I understood it differently. But if he takes parental responsibility...
You can answer in both ways.
Yes. One, if it's his biological child and the mother wants to leave the child solely to him, I would advise him to get a parental responsibility agreement, have it recorded as an order of the court, so that he retains full legal and actual custody over the child. The same thing applies where he has acquired parental responsibility over the child. It's not enough for you to be left with the child because an issue might arise later. Have it documented, and once it's an order of the court, anyone who will come after him later will have to go through the court process. Yes.
Peter, asante sana for your call. Of course, you can call in again if you feel like Wakili should expound more on your question. We have a question here from Wanraka. Now, Lisa, how does it work if a stepfather who appears on the birth certificate is challenged? But okay, let's get this call first. Sylvester from Kakamega, good morning.
Good morning.
Talk to us.
My name is Sylvester Muteshi.
Okay. Sylvester?
Yeah, I'm asking.
Yes.
In some communities, children are said to belong to the mother.
Okay.
What is the legal standing about that?
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sylvester, for that question. Wakili.
That's an interesting question,
Yes.
especially in circumstances where the mother unfortunately dies without the man ever having paid dowry. Unfortunately, the law as it is in Kenya right now does not consider those cultural practices. The biological parents will always have the first priority. So there are times where it's a very unfortunate situation where it's the grandparents and the father or the grandparents and the mother who are in court. But whenever that happens, the biological parent always has the primary duty, responsibilities, and control of our child. Yes.
All right. Sylvester, you can call in again. We have another call from Eldred. Godfrey, good morning. Godfrey?
Yes, good morning.
Yes, talk to us.
Na nilikuwa nauliza certificate za watoto wangu.
Okay.
Niliwapea tu majina yao, jina langu liko kwa birth certificate but si kuweka surname kwa majina zao.
Okay.
Inaweza leta issue kule mbele kwa nilisikia hawezi enda nje ya nchi kama surname haiko kwa kitambulisho yake. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Wakili.
He has raised two issues. One, he says his name is on the birth certificate, but not as a surname. The basic definition of the surname is the father's name. So as long as his name in full is there, the surname is implicit. It's provided for as long as the name of the father is captured in the birth certificate. Now, by the time someone gets an ID, they are deemed fit to travel with or without the consent of the parents, so that issue would not arise. But as long as they have not turned 18, they can't travel outside the country without his consent. Yes.
Okay. The question that I was reading out is, Wandraka anauliza, how does it work if a stepfather who appears on the birth certificate is challenged by the real biological dad on who the father is? Custody rights, we addressed that.
Yes.
Laban Shege is asking, what if wife alitoa jina yangu kwa birth certificate na later akaolewa?
In both cases, one, the biological parent will always have a right to have their name appear. So if it was removed, he can apply to have it added to the birth certificate. In the first instance where the stepfather has assumed parental responsibility and duties over the child, it depends on whether it was through a court process. Because if it was through a court process, then the biological father would have to go and challenge that process in court. And ideally, before this stepfather is allowed to take up the responsibilities, the biological father ought to be served with the court papers and accorded a chance to respond. So if he chose not to, he cannot come back later after the court decided and some years have passed and decide, now I'm ready to be included in my child's life. Yes.
All right. Murich is asking, well, what are the consequences of not appearing on the birth certificate, yet you're the father and you decide to withdraw your support?
Even if you're not on the birth certificate as a father, parental duties and responsibilities can still follow you. If the mother applies for maintenance, you'll still be held liable to pay maintenance for the child. Maybe the only thing you can do in rejoinder is that you can also apply to have now your name added to the birth certificate, say that it's my child and my name is not on the birth certificate. You can ask for your name to be added, you can ask for access and visitation, but parental responsibility for a biological parent will always follow you wherever you go. Yes.
Nyambu anauliza, of course, as we wind up, stepdad anaweza chukua full custody akiwa ameandikwa kwa birth certificate?
Full legal and actual custody is only granted to one parent where the other parent has shown disinterest and is unwilling to acknowledge or participate in the life of the child in any way. So unless now the stepfather had taken custody and the mother unfortunately passes away, in such circumstances, yes, he can, if he's done with actual custody and the biological dad has no interest in the welfare of the child, and the stepfather is able to take care of the child, he will be granted actual and legal custody of that child.
The final question now as we wind up. How is that consent given? I saw that question somewhere here, but that is what he was asking. How is that consent given? Is it a signed document? Yes, here it is. Oto Gunja, how is that consent given? A signed document or what?
Okay, whichever, whether it's a consent for the addition of a name to the birth certificate, or it's a consent for the child to travel, it will be a sworn affidavit. That's a sworn statement. However, for purposes of travel outside the country, then it would have to be a notarized affidavit as opposed to, in Kenya, we have a system where you swear oaths before either judicial officers or a commissioner for oaths. But when you are going to other jurisdictions, it has to be by a notary public, who are still advocates who are given extra responsibilities. You apply to be a notary. Yes.
All right. That is Wakili Maina Patrick Njama, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, talking to us about father's right on the birth certificate. Thank you so much, Wakili, for making time this morning. We do appreciate your time. And thank you so much for your feedback, for calling in, and for being part of this conversation. That brings us to the end of the show. Good morning. My name is Anne Odide. Enjoy the rest of your day.